Доброе утро.
Good morning, everyone.
Я рад, что нашлись люди утром в пятницу.
I'm happy that there are people who came here on Friday
Это очень
morning to listen to the C language lecture. And my name is
познакомимся.
Victor Perevertkin.
Работаю в лаборатории.
Let me introduce myself a little bit. I work in Kaspersky Lab, and I develop in the lab cyber immune system, Kaspersky Lives.
Мой проект
It's not my first project
системы.
of an operation system.
Contributed.
I was contributing in open source and actually like low-level stuff, and I write them using C.
В своем докладе я расскажу
And in my presentation, I will tell you about how modern developers using this language,
инструменты,
using different tools, techniques, and approaches
писать программы безопасно и надежно.
to write programs securely and
Вас когда-нибудь писал на
reliably. Did anyone write anything in C language? Okay, great.
придется
So then
подробно объяснять.
I won't have to explain examples with the code in too much detail.
Когда вам кто-нибудь, если вас кто-нибудь попросит рассказать про
If somebody asks you
рассказывайте.
to tell them about C language, so what do you know about it? What usually would you start with? Okay, indicators.
Многопоточность, да.
Okay, multi-flows, multi-streams.
Ну, этот язык с нами всем, я думаю, известно, что это
I think everybody knows that we've been with this language for quite a bit. It's one of the oldest languages, and it's been actively used.
этот язык очень популярен в системном программировании, во всяких
It's very popular in system programming,
разработке.
in some embedded
Еще люблю говорить, что
development.
для изучения.
I also say that it's pretty simple in studying. It's simple like chess. It's very easy to learn the rules, and then it goes as it goes.
На последнее время
And especially
о
now,
том, что
we've been
недопасен.
talking about how insecure
В том же дело.
the language is.
Со всех сторон всякие разные, в
So
том числе уважаемые
why?
организации, например,
Many organizations with good reputation and respected, even the White House,
что
they tell us.
давайте-ка вы не будете,
So
будете поменьше писать кода на C,
don't write too much code in C language
много дырок для атак.
because of it, we have way too many vulnerabilities for the attackers. There are many spots where they can write exploits. Write something using a modern language, more secure one. Google
Про свои большие проекты,
regularly
про Chromium,
releases reports about their big projects with
всех уязвимостей,
Chromium and many other things, Android, and they say that most of the vulnerabilities
из которых потом получаются эксплойты,
that
уязвимости типа
they use for exploits, then that's because of the
все
memory safety.
проблемы.
And as we know, C has
Ну и Google
quite a bit of problems with this.
рекомендует отходить от C и C
And Google also suggests that we leave C and C+,
на Rust и на Kotlin.
and so they rewrite in Android to Rust and Kotlin. So one component after another, they do that. So, and Microsoft
В эту стезю
is going to do the same.
на всех своих конференциях
In all the conferences, they
используют Rust в своем.
saying that they're using Astra, they're using it in their kernel,
Тоже говорят, что отказываетесь-ка вы потихоньку от C.
and they say, so
На этом, в принципе,
begin to get rid of the C. And we could have finished our presentation. It's kind of, don't write in C and you'll be happy.
проекты, которые у нас уже есть, можно
And all the current projects, you can just rewrite them,
безопасно.
and it's going to be safe.
Давайте подумаем,
But let's think.
если бы мы действительно приняли
If
такую концепцию, что
we
нам пришлось бы переписать
accept this concept, and what would we need to rewrite in this case?
такой среднестатистический
I think that any
Android, если померить там
average smartphone based on Android, and if you look at the code lines that they use in it,
там, если не
it
больше
turns out
всего,
that the coding in C it's probably more than
на
others,
C у нас написаны,
or as minimum just as much.
написано огромное количество всяких
In
известных
C, They wrote many big projects in C. These are operating systems, databases,
Даже Python нельзя было
compilers of language, and Python can be used properly if you don't have C.
Git. Самый популярный инструмент для разработчиков.
Guide, the most popular tool for developers, is also in C. So you can't rewrite the whole thing,
Наверное.
and probably you shouldn't.
Хотя некоторые проекты пытаются это сделать,
But some projects are trying to do that,
сталкиваются с проблемами.
and that's the problems they encounter.
Я думаю, что
I think
слышали
that
недавно в линуксовом языке
they've heard about this recent war about
между разработчиком
developer of the kernel
внедрять Rust. Тут
between the developers who are trying to
более старый
do
разработчик
to introduce Rust there and older
уже давно.
developers who are writing the kernel for a while. And the conflict was
Ну, конфликт был связан с тем, что одни люди хотели писать сервера на Rust, а другие
that one
содействовать.
group wanted to write drivers in Rust and others didn't want to do that.
В той манере
So it turned out that
написать трактат.
so they had to write
После
like a big
пара мейнтейнеров
manuscript and script about.
ушли со своей позиции, и после этого оно как-то все подутихло.
So and after writing this like big volume of things, they
Или, к
sort of
сожалению,
the whole thing
многих open source
calmed
проектов,
down.
которыми я слежу,
In many open source projects that I'm monitoring
возникает больше именно вот
using
идеологических
Rust,
проблем, а не технических.
they encounter some ideological problems, not technical ones. And technical though exists too.
Использовать,
If we
вдруг захотим использовать C и Rust,
want to use C and Rust in the same project,
или все-таки переписать его с C на Rust, но
say we wanted to rewrite the project from C to Rust,
столкнемся с проблемами
and they're doing it gradually, then this is the problems we can encounter.
в системе. Очень тяжело это все
For example, in build system, it's very hard to marry the two.
интегрируется именно по части билда.
Rust is not very well integrated in terms of this system. And interoperability, they also have certain nuances. So in Linux kernel, we'll see that.
Публикацию как раз
And recently I saw this publication.
драйверов на Linux.
It was written by the pioneers of developing drivers in Linux using Rust. And they're comparing the network driver, the one that was written in Rust, and the one that was in the kernel written in C.
Как бы
And it turned out that
производительность такая.
it's more or less good, and the performance is almost the same. But in some cases,
Вот те самые дополнительные проверки, которые
they see these additional checks
добавляют гарантию,
that Rust adds that gives you more sort of guarantee,
то есть
and they slow down the program.
но все-таки не бесплатные.
They're pretty cheap, but they're not
Также
for free.
препятствие на пути внедрения Rust в проект может
Then another impediments in
и
implementing the Rust,
помимо огромного количества
besides
проектов, которые были
many projects that you could see on the slide,
еще куча всяких маленьких библиотечек,
there's a whole bunch of small libraries.
разработчик на C
For
зачастую
example, developer in C, when they need to do something, then the first thing they do,
библиотеку,
they Google a library
нужно. Там
that does what the developer needs.
устройствами,
It can be work with devices, or maybe some cryptography,
случайные числа и так далее.
or some random numbers and other things.
Систем,
And also for embedded systems,
которые выпускаются для
the tools
определенных
that
процессов,
are released for certain processors
могут быть заточены только,
main
ну, иногда еще. Компилятор, отладить,
can be
среда разработки,
used only with C. This is the development environment and many other things. So you can put the Rust like with one big task, but not many people would like to do that. And you shouldn't forget,
говорят про C, а обычно
when people talk about C, they always remember about its performance.
самым простым
It's
способом
only in C with the simplest way you can write a program
быстро, чтобы она работала настолько быстро, насколько
why
это возможно.
that would work as quickly as it's possible.
Про проблемы внедрения Rust мы поговорили.
So these are the issues of Rust introductions. So now,
От C мы никуда не уйдем.
so we can't leave C,
Безопасно.
but how to make it
Поговорить про это,
safe?
сделать небольшое отступление
Before talking about this, I would like to
одни языки считаем безопасными, другие нет.
speak about why some languages are
Здесь
secure and some of them are not.
называемых
The main criteria is this is the guarantee of safe access to the memory. It was just called memory safety.
Обычно она
Usually,
делится на 5 более мелких
they split it into 5 smaller guarantees. One of them is called temporal safety.
Безопасность. Язык, который ее гарантирует,
The language that guarantees it
говорит нам, что
tells
доступ к
us
объекту возможен
that
только
access to the object is possible only during its life cycle. So we allocated the object, then you can access it, then we cleaned it, and then you have a guarantee.
можем получить
So
к очищенному объекту. Дальше есть spatial
then we have spatial safety.
объяснить на примере массивов.
It's very easy to explain when you have arrays.
Никаким образом
We have 8 elements for arrays, and the language guarantees that
получить доступ.
you can get beyond the 10th element. And there is type safety. This is about types of data.
Объект с типом
So if we created an object with the
можем его прочитать из памяти
whole number,
вещественного числа.
and then we cannot use the.
Дальше мое самое любимое
And then my other thing, my favorite thing, thread safety. This is the
сделать отсылку
threading safety. So this is, I would like to refer to the
развитие моделей памяти.
report that was done yesterday, development of the memory models. All of you who are interested in multi-threading, so I highly recommend it. And
Все доступы
thread safety tells us that all
синхронизированы. То бишь,
access to memory should be synchronized. It shouldn't be a situation when some cell of memory
нескольких потоков.
they have
Одним исключением,
simultaneous
специальных ячеек, которые называются
inquiry from several threads.
последнее, это детерминация.
And the latest one, this is definite initialization.
В том, что когда мы создаем
It tells us when we create an object,
ситуации,
a new object, there cannot be a situation
понятные данные, мы всегда
when there is some
с какими
old,
объектами
unclear data, and we always need to know with what object they're values, with what object they're affiliated. So what is with C guarantees? With C, it's pretty bad.
На самом деле, я очень хотел
fact,
добавить сюда хотя бы одну галочку.
I would like to add here at least one tick,
Initialization в C тоже не поддерживается.
but in fact,
Это
definite initialization is not supported with the standard in C. So it's done with a special key.
быть. Что же можно
Compiler.
сделать с этим именно касательно
So
C?
what should we do with this
Посмотрим, какие есть для этого
regarding
инструменты.
C language?
Из инструментов
So what
динамического
tools do we have? And I'll start with the tools of dynamic analysis.
Эти инструменты работают во время работы
These
самой программы,
tools
поэтому и динамические.
work during the program run. That's why they're dynamic. And the biggest breakthrough
Анализа
in the dynamic tools of analysis was done by Google when they came up with Sanitizer. And
собираем программу
the idea is very simple. We
со специальным
build the program using compiler with a special option.
кода, который
And besides the code
в программе,
that we have in the program,
вставляются еще
the resulting program
проверки. Как раз
gets additional checks, and for all the types of guarantees that we would like to check.
изначально этот инструмент был сделан скорее
Initially, this tool
все, что он
was done for pluses, and
поддерживает, тоже. Единственный минус
but it's actually quite valid for C. The only negative of sanitizers is that they use a lot of resources.
не поделаешь.
Sadly, you can't do much about
И
it.
первый инструмент — это адрес санитайзер.
And the first tool, this is address sanitizer. This is the most resulting one
багов и с точки зрения
from the point of view of the bugs found and how it's used. It can find all the issues that we have with temporal safety and spatial safety.
Вот такой вот есть пример кода, очень простой.
This is the example of the code. We have a global array.
Примером 100 элементов, и мы
It's about 100 elements, and we're trying to get access to some element which is more than 100.
собираем программу с адрес санитайзера.
We build the program with address sanitizer, we launch it, and it gives us an error.
Global buffer overflow.
You can see global buffer overflow,
Место, в котором произошло
and it shows us the place where the error was made,
название массива.
and it shows us the name of the array where the error is. It's very convenient.
все проблемы, которые есть.
you can immediately see all the problems that exist.
Вот еще один пример. Это
Another example.
типичный такой use of
This is a typical
мы аллоцируем
one. So we allocate
память,
memory,
по указателю записываем туда значение.
and according to the pointer, we write down the value, and then the memory is free. And using the old pointer, we're trying to write something more. There's something else there. So we do it with address sanitizer, and then we get the alert that
То, что вы
use after free. So what did you do?
Даже есть полезная информация, связанная с
And there is
была аллоцирована
useful information where the memory was allocated,
с которой происходит use after free, и где она была.
the one that experiences use after free,
Когда инструмент
and where it's located 10 years ago when the tool was just there, so it couldn't do it.
про то, как это работает,
A couple of words about how it works.
в программе, которая
In the
запущена с
program
санитайзером,
that is launched with address sanitizer,
вместе с памятью основной программы,
together with the memory of the main program that is used for work, we have a special region that is called the shadow memory.
в нем находится информация о том,
There is information about the regions of the main memory regions are valid and which are not. And then with all the actions of the memory,
чтение или
with it allocation, reading, or writing,
добавляется проверка. Мы просто лезем
they add
в shadow карту,
a check. You go to the shadow
валидно
card,
память, можем ли мы с
and
ней
you see
сделать то
if
действие,
the memory is valid and if we can do with it what we want to do with it. So if yes, then it's all good.
Дальше у нас идет memory sanitizer.
Then memory sanitizer.
Название похоже, но он немножко другого.
The name is similar, but it's about a different thing. Memory sanitizer looks
Использовать
for those parts in the program where we're trying to read the non-initialized data.
штука,
Seems like a simple thing,
но это очень важно. Это закрывает
but
важный класс уязвимостей, который
it closes a very important class of vulnerabilities. And if we don't cover it, so we may have a leak of very important data, for example, for a kernel. That's not pleasant.
создается
Here,
массив.
in the example, we create an array
Мы
of 10 elements.
только один,
So we initialize just one,
первый элемент, и потом пытаемся
only first one,
не первый.
and then we try to read all the others, not the first one.
Приходит
And immediately we have the alert
ай-яй-яй, у нас
that,
инициализировано
sorry, so we have the use of uninitialized
Несмотря на то, что,
data,
функционал кажется таким довольно
initialized value. And it seems that functionality is pretty simple.
гораздо больше памяти.
Memory sanitizer actually requires more memory than address sanitizer, and because of that, you cannot launch them in parallel together. So you have to test the program with one tool, then with the other.
Дальше у нас идет thread
Then
sanitizer.
we have thread sanitizer.
Ищет так
Thread
называемые
sanitizer
гонки.
looks for the state of race, data race, and it looks for them
Или C++.
as it is written in standard C or C++.
Data race.
Data race in C
Такая ситуация, когда у нас
is the
в
situation
памяти происходит
when in one cell of the memory,
потоков, и при этом
you have access from several threads, and one of those accesses, this is writing.
находит в коде thread sanitizer.
So it finds such situations in the code. This is what thread sanitizer does. There is a global variable, and at the beginning of the program, it creates a thread that is trying to write something into the global variable, and in another thread
Первый. Мы
where we created the first one, we're trying to write something down once again. And thus we have writing from two threads, and thread sanitizer finds it very well. So we have data race. It's very detailed. You have a track trace of one
запись второго потока.
thread and the second thread,
Современный
and they even tell us in which variable we had the race.
классный инструмент. Жалко только,
It's a great tool.
что жрет много ресурсов.
Sadly, it actually eats a lot of resources.
Кто слышал про undefined behavior?
Please raise your hand if you had heard about undefined
Вижу боль в
behavior.
глазах.
I can see pain in your eyes.
Язык C — это такой язык,
C language
для
is
которого
such a
нужен
language
санитайзер специально
that you
для
need
того,
a
чтобы
special sanitizer
места стандарта, который
so that not to step in those parts of the
поведение в
standard
которых не определено.
in which behavior is not determined.
И для этого как раз нужен
And for this, you have undefined behavior sanitizer.
мест в стандарте
One of such parts in the standards,
выполнение знакового числа.
this is the overfilled of
Что должно в этот момент
the
происходить.
sign value, sign number,
Пытаемся сделать,
and
чтобы
C doesn't tell you what to do with this. If we're trying to do something like that,
нам об этом напомнит.
then the tool will remind us about it.
Надо бы исправить код.
So you need to change your code. You need to fix it.
Последний инструмент из этой категории.
The last tool from this category, this is actually a super new tool.
В последней версии компилятора Clang.
It just appeared in the latest version of compiler Clang.
Ищет проблемы.
Compiler Clang, this is type sanitizer. It looks for
Вот в этом
errors
примере
in
мы попробуем
looking for
создать
types.
variable
In
x,
this example, we're trying to create a variable
подберем не
x,
указатель, но берем
whole
указатель
number, and we take the
float.
pointer for that,
И после этого
and we
пытаемся прибавить
and then
к этому
float,
числу
and then we're trying to
эту
add to this
строку
number
вещественную.
2, but
И
material
затем
one.
получаем
And
проблему
we get
с type
the
sanitizer.
problem of type sanitizer,
Типа int мы пытаемся
that the object type int we are trying to access, so you shouldn't do that.
Это были санитайзеры.
So these were
Очень классные, очень мощные
sanitizers,
инструменты, но, к
great,
сожалению, из-за
powerful
того, что
tools.
они расходуют много ресурсов,
Sadly, that since they use a lot of resources,
ими только в отладке.
most of the time develops they use only in the fixing mode, so to speak. But do we have something for production?
Современные
here
процессоры.
We have modern processors.
Есть
In some of them,
специальная технология,
there is special technology.
тегированная память или тегированный
It's called tagged memory or tagged
она позволяет
pointers,
искать ошибки
and it helps you to find errors that are related to the memory right on the hardware level.
указатель,
Here we allocating memory,
ПТР
we put the PTR pointer,
окрашивается
and during the allocation, the memory is colored.
в той области памяти, которую мы
And
фиксировали,
that part of the memory that is colored, that we allocated, we also need to color the pointer.
регионы
And
памяти
please notice that regions of the memory,
должны быть другого цвета.
the ones that are adjacent to the
Пытаемся
colored one, they should be of a different color.
получить доступ,
So we allocated the memory,
получить
and then we're trying to get access to the memory beyond the boundary of the allocated region.
который представлен к указателю.
So then, so you see the tag of the
У нас ошибка.
if the colors are not of the same color, then we have the error.
Указателя мы его
So
очищаем.
after working with the pointer, we clean it.
Очень важно память перекрасить.
And here it's very important to recolor
После
the
этого, если
memory.
мы попробуем по старому указателю,
And if using the previous pointer, but we didn't recolor the pointer, so if you're trying to get access using the old pointer, then the processor sees the unmatch of the
вот так нам
tags,
помогают
and we get the use after free
К сожалению,
error. So this is how the process helps you in the work. Sadly, this technology wasn't supported everywhere.
вещей это
And from the known things, we have ARM.
tagging extension.
It's called memory tagging extension.
В современных телефонах есть.
In modern phones, we have it,
А также это поддерживает
and also
процессор Elbrus.
it's supported by Russian processor Elbrus.
Если в арме
And if an ARM
указателем должен поместиться
tags and the pointer should fit 64 bits, but in Elbrus, in the safe mode, they have 128 bits.
такой вот тег обычный, но и, например,
You can write not just on a regular tag, but you can actually write the information about the type of the data.
целый type sanitizer железный.
So you can have the whole type sanitizer
Динамические анализаторы.
made into hardware. So that was the dynamic analyzers. The main negative for them is
В
that
программе она
for them to find an error in the program, the error should occur. That's why with the dynamic analysis, it's very important that you have a very good coverage of tests of your code, and better if you use fuzzing.
Сразу за динамическим анализом
So right
следует
after dynamic analysis, you have static analysis.
будем анализировать просто код.
So let's just analyze the code.
Статический анализатор
Static analyzer
Для него не нужно запускать программу, он
You don't need to launch a program for it. You just
может
analyze the code,
анализировать довольно большие кодовые
and
базы.
it can analyze actually big code data, databases. And for developers, it's very convenient. So
Сразу проверяется, ничего не
if you prepare a CI and it just checks the code,
анализатор нашел какую-то
and
проблему,
if your static analyzer found a problem,
указать место, где она произошла.
it can show you the place where the error happened in comparison to dynamic analyzers where it's not always possible. And one minus here is disadvantage here is that it false positives. Sadly, it's quite a big problem in practice. You can't really do much about it. But in our company, we use static analyzers and we use several of them. Some of them
одни ошибки, какие-то находят
find
другие.
one type of mistake, some of them find other type of mistakes. Here you have an example of the code
Ошибка, которую нашел PV.
with the error that was found by PVS Studio.
Здесь у нас в первой строчке проверяем
Here in the first line, we check the pointer by PTR, if it's 0 or not. Then we do certain actions with it.
на
And then
207 строчке, берем
on the 267th line, we take the pointer again,
из него
we get
другой указатель и дальше с
a
ним
different pointer from it, and then we do something with it.
здесь.
Can you see a problem in it?
Так, ну ладно, там, наверное, не слышно будет.
Maybe you won't hear it over there.
Что
But the problem is
мы используем указатель после
that
того,
we
как
use
проверили его на ноль.
pointer
Несмотря на то, что конкретно
after we checked it for 0. So in this part of the code, we don't have an error.
использование указателя
But nevertheless, that use of a pointer is unsafe.
анализатор нам его нашел.
And the static analyzer found it for us, and it highlighted it.
Еще один пример. Вот PVS Studio
Another example.
нашел. Зато нашел
In PVS Studio, I didn't find it, but I found a different analyzer as Vase.
кода из
This is part of the code
из библиотеки, которая работает с
from the library
множествами.
that works with bit
Здесь важно, что
arrays.
переменная
And
в которой
here you have the variable r,
является индекс в каком-то
where they calculate an index of some array
дата.
as data.
А потом у нас есть проверка assert.
And then we have
Этот индекс в
check
массиве, он
that this index in the array,
собственно, в границе этого массива. Но есть
it
проблема.
is within the boundaries of the array.
Проверки стоит меньше,
And if
а должно быть
in
меньше, потому что
the check it's less or equal, because its index it can be equal to the array.
space.
So Space found this error.
Дополнительных стат-анализаторов
Besides additional stat analyzers, modern compilers, they help us a lot here as well.
компилятор, конечно, не может
Compilers
проводить прям полноценный
can't
статистический анализ,
do this full-scale statistical analysis because it's going to take too long,
использовать другой компилятор.
and developers would use a different compiler that can build a program, assemble a program much faster. But modern compilers,
Проблемы в коде.
they can find a number of problems,
Потому что, скажем,
especially if you update the compiler, because with each updated version, their checking is much better. Just one thing you shouldn't forget,
которые
you
говорят,
shouldn't forget the keys that tell you about the errors, and the compiler will help you to do it.
вот, например, есть вот такой кусок кода.
Here, for instance, you have this piece of code.
На стеке переменную.
We allocate a variable within the function in the stack and then try to return the variable pointer.
Мы выходим из функции в C.
As it is known, when we get out of the function in C, everything that has been allocated in the stack is cleaned. And so at the end of this function, the pointer will be invalid. And the first thing that told us that was the compiler. So if you just enable all the default wordings, any modern compiler finds this problem. Everything's fine.
Смотрим на проблему,
And here,
которую
when we take a look at a problem in the code,
идея.
someone might get an idea. And what if
Нам не придется искать проблему,
we won't
если мы
need to find a problem in the code if we start writing bugs?
тоже для этого придумали
Strange as it may seem,
инструменты. Так,
people have also devised some tools for that. Let's call it this way. It's a subset of C.
использовать
Let's just disallow using some widespread constructs in the language which people often use to launch errors, to make errors. And then we'll get a smaller number of errors. There are quite a lot of such subsets. MISRA C, for instance, that's used in embedded systems for certification. These standards may be quite stringent, may impose quite strict constraints. For instance, one of the constraints may be a ban on memory allocation in the heap, so you can only use the stack. For many developers, and actually even for many applications, this won't work. Also, we have the AUTOSAR standard from the automotive industry, where they're very serious about safety and security. There's also CERT-C coding standards from CERT.
И также снова нам здесь может помочь
And
компилятор.
again, the compiler may help us there.
На уровне компилятора
At the compiler level, it's possible to block some capabilities of the C language, the one we hate the most.
появилась
For instance, in C99,
переменной длины, variable
variable length arrays appeared.
мнение, что это
And it's broadly believed that it's not a very good feature.
уязвимости.
Quite a lot of vulnerabilities are related to it,
Разработчиков Linux
including those for Linux. At some point, Linux developers were so sick and tired of that they just cleaned out any use of this in their code and added an option to the compiler just won't compile the code if it has this.
такое тоже есть.
So there are such things for some versions of the language.
Про инструменты я немножко сказал.
I've spoken a bit about the tools,
Еще поговорить
and now I would like to talk about the language as such. It may come as a surprise for some, but C is still developing.
новые стандарты. Пример
New standards get published roughly once in every 10 years. Of course, one would wish that it should happen more often. Last year, the latest standards was issued, C23. This slide shows an example of code that uses quite a lot of features from there. So we see that type of
слово авто,
after the keyword,
null pointer.
null pointer,
Ключевое слово появилось для него.
another keyword appeared for it,
И также еще несколько возможностей.
and
Например, объявление
some other language figures, for instance, declaring a structure right in the function type being returned. It didn't used to exist. And I would like to speak about similar features of C23.
зашло.
One that I liked really much,
Возможность довольно
I
маленькая.
think
Мне кажется, что
it may be quite a minor feature, but still very important.
такое переполнение.
You remember, I was speaking about sign overflow, that all these are defined failures.
Проверки
In the past, in order to run,
избегать такой
in order to avoid the situation, you had to insert verifications everywhere. So we have two operands. So together, they shouldn't be able to overflow. And if it matches, then it's an error. Now we have an inbuilt function that can say, so here's A and B, please make a sum of them. And if it results in an overflow,
эти функции возвращают
then these functions will return true. So you can process this error in some way. And if the overflow doesn't happen, they return false. And then in the result variable, we can calculate or compute the result.
еще одна
Another
C20.
new feature of C23.
Константа
It's about a different constant for the null pointer. In the past, it was just defined to 0, typified,
в стандарте тип не определен.
and the standard didn't define the type. So this construct, such as
Integer, она
send null to the parameter of the integer type, was possible in the standard.
исправит такую проблему.
In order to fix this problem, they decided, just like in C++, to add null PTRT and the UPTF constant, null PTF constant. I'm hoping, in the hope that that would help solving the problem with null pointers. However, that may result in implementation issues.
Здесь уже не про безопасность.
This one's not about safety or security, but strange as it may seem, C is quite popular for embedded systems programming. It didn't have functions to operate with bits in numbers. We had bit-based operations, but
Часто используемые вещи, как, например,
that
посчитать количество единиц в числе
broadly
ноликов,
use things such as to count the number of zeros or ones in number were absent, even though there were some specialized instructions to do that. So we finally welcome this moment in the development of C23. So you have these bit-based functions now.
ноликов.
So counting
Также можно
ones and zeros.
узнать
Also, you can learn the order of bytes in the system. In the past, you had to use some non-standard ways for that. It's all very comfortable.
Ну и
And
большое количество других
there are
возможностей. Прямо
also a lot of other
подробно рассказывать.
capabilities that I'm not going to talk about in detail. The auto keyword,
Писать через апостроф.
you can
Разделитель, они, конечно, выполнены.
use an asterisk as a divider.
Числа с произвольным количеством бит. Теперь можно
Numbers with an arbitrary number of bits are also possible.
15-битный шорт.
Now you can not only have a standard long bit number, but you can, for instance, use a 24-bit number and use this in a graph.
Это был C23.
So that was about C23.
Не останавливается.
But the language hasn't stopped there.
Стандартизации. Также
So C has a standards committee, just like C++. Of course, it doesn't work in such a short cycle as that one, but nevertheless,
C2.
it's doing quite planned work on what's going to be called CYY.
Векторы развития.
So the committee has development vectors. They try to reduce the number of UBs in the standard.
Комитет
The committee
с поиском и стандартизацией
is
практик. Здесь имеется в виду
looking for best practices. The compilers,
сам C.
the C compilers have existed for as long as the language itself, and quite a lot of compiler extensions have found their way to the market. And in fact, they're quite broadly used. Without some of them, you can't even write an operating system. So the committee is on the lookout of such things and tries to bring it into the standards. One of the examples is type-off that appeared in C, and then everybody started to use it, even though that was a compiler extension. Another is string-based API. I wouldn't recommend doing anything with strings in C. Everybody knows this problem. And the committee, and by the way, it's not the first iteration of the standards. They're trying to come up with a new API to interact with strings. I've seen a draft. It looks promising, and I'm hoping they manage to do it. So you'll be able to work with strings in a safer way in C. And perhaps the one that I expect the most,
Ключевое слово defer,
the keyword here is defer, just like in Go.
которое позволяет отложить
That allows you deferring the execution of the code to the end of the function. So before we leave the function,
код, который
we'll execute the code that will send over to it via defer. So this thing,
Если она дотянет до стандарта, через
if it
будет гораздо более удобно
makes it to the standard, will help making resource allocation and cleansing in a much better way.
я надеюсь.
So that will boost security and safety quite a lot, I'm hoping. So it's an example of the code, the way it's planned. It's supposed to be done now. It just prints these lines and outputs the following. You see, the first word here is dog, which was mentioned the last in the code, but without the keyword defer. So it was the first to be executed, and then the execution covered what was entered with a preface of defer.
Для C у нас
So for C,
время существования языка
over the time of the language's existence,
разработчики
we have written quite a lot of extensions.
позволило
Developers use them quite broadly.
коде. И
That has allowed to find a lot of errors in the code and mitigate them. But the language keeps developing. I would personally like it to, develop faster, but this will also do.
прям специальные
There are
для написания
practices, some special guidelines to write safe code.
код будет
So just use them and your code will be safe and secure. The only thing that remains to be done is to implement all these practices in your development process.
не стоит думать, что
And one shouldn't think
в ближайшее время вот
that
избавиться
we'll be able to get rid of C
еще долго. И
in the foreseeable future. We'll keep using it for quite a long time.
спасибо.
Thank you for your attention.
По ссылке можно прочитать про
You can use this link to read about the operating system that Kaspersky is working on and also to evaluate this presentation. Thank you.
Аплодисменты.
Your applause, friends, regarding the feedback. Victor has made his first presentation in his career, so you must leave feedback so that he should continue making such great reports. So questions. So there's someone here. Shoot. Hello. Thank you for the life-asserting presentation. But I have a question. You mentioned that using a phaser improves the effectiveness of verification using sanitizer. But the phasers in drivers or in the core of the kernel of the operating system is a separate problem. There are some specialized libraries that can be fuzzed in user space. So basically, that's what you're doing in the process.
ядро построено по архитектуре микроядра. То есть
Kernel
он прям
is based on the microkernel architecture.
специально для
So the code is very small. And so specifically to use the kernel fuzzing, we don't take anything out of it.
юзерспейсных
We use fuzzing tools from the user space applications.
адаптировать. Об этом
And actually one had to adapt them for our operating system. We made quite a few presentations about that.
юзерспейс разными инструментами.
We just fuzz the kernel and the user space with different tools. Clear. Thank you very much. Thank you for your question.
Спасибо за
Over to you.
вопросик.
Thank you for the presentation. A couple of
Что при
questions.
использовании
You mentioned
адреса
that
трейсера
using analysis sanitizer,
есть
you can find all problems that exist. Maybe there are some cases where you wouldn't be able to find some problems this way.
Ну, если ошибка
Well,
случилась именно,
if the error has already happened, the error may be, but in the process of execution, we may not encounter it.
в процессе работы
So-
он не происходит. И
So there may be an erroneous situation, but it won't be triggered during the process. Then perhaps the sanitizer won't help. Yes, that's one case, but some other cases, I think, may also be possible. All these coloring of the map, the shadow
да,
maps, also have some restrictions, right? Yes. For instance, there's a size restriction,
Тег, если мы берем архитектуру
size constraint. If we take the ARM architecture, the tag will be written in the pointer
значащими байтами,
together with the payload bytes, and the number of colors
которые там могут быть, не ограничены.
will not be limited. So in that case, we may also miss. Yes. And the last question.
Есть какие-то оценки вот по производительности
Are there any
между использованием
estimations on the performance of between dynamic and using dynamic analyzers and tagging?
Память не скажу, потому что
I wouldn't say about tagged memory
с этими железками
because unfortunately I don't have my own experience working with this hardware. I just know that it exists. As to the sanitizer, the address sanitizer normally slows down by the factor of 2. Thread sanitizer 5 to 7 times. I can't say anything about type sanitizer. It's just appeared, and I personally have not yet made any measurements. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Victor, thank you very much for your presentation. I have the following question. You mentioned that the C standard is actively developing. You gave us an example of C23, but what is it leading up to? Are we really going to get C++11 in a couple of iterations, and might it not make sense to switch to C++11? When I was reading reports from the committee meetings, it was clearly seen that people really don't want to add any other additional capabilities to the language. And even what has been added, it's very limited. There are no constant functions, there are only constant, and that's it. Of course, we may theoretically arrive there, but I'm hoping that the committee will keep sanity, will keep common sense. Are you going to come back to us in 2040 to tell about it? Yes, of course, I will. Next question. Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I know that Kaspersky, for its operating systems, provides improvements. Have you made any corrections in the compiler for your custom warning or some out-of-the-box requests to the developers of statistical analyzers? Unfortunately, I don't work. I'm not part of the team that interacts with the developers of statistical analyzers. What I know is that we have experience reporting bugs to them, and they have experience fixing them. As to improvement, well, I don't think we have any custom errors, but they will appear, I think. But we keep doing a lot of work in order just to port the existing tools to our operating system, take the sanitizers and so forth. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, the dynamic tools, can one use them in mere controllers in the shortage of resources? Of course, if you have resources, if there's enough memory for the microcontroller, theoretically, nothing stands in the way for using sanitizers. It's clear that when it comes to practice, it should support the connection to this controller, because a regular sanitizer can be launched if there's memory for it, but there are also specialized versions of sanitizers, limited, that consume less memory. They, as a rule, try to cut corners, and they know that they're operating on microcontrollers, for instance. They know that there can't be a lot of memory there, or they rely on some other things typical of this environment. In that case, as far as I know, they have this kind of tools, and they're being developed. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Look, we had a very good discussion before you came up on stage, and you told me the story how you entered the sea world. Can you please share with the audience in just a couple of minutes?
когда я был на первом курсе,
Yes, when I was still in the first year of the university, I was thinking that I was going to become a web developer. I was writing in Python, the front end in JavaScript.
на работу пошел,
I even
потом
took a job
когда
as an intern.
у меня был курс по
And then when I got into a course on assembly language, I understood that JavaScript is not something I would like to pursue. Things change too often. There, people reinvent the wheel all the time. And
абстракции ниже.
I thought, so why don't I go a couple of abstraction level lower? And that's how I arrived at C.
Супер.
And how do you like it? Super so far. Okay, cool. Now the time for the next question.
Мне, наверное, понравился вопрос последний
To the best question. I like the last question
во встраиваемых
about the analyzers in embedded systems. So come to the stage and get the prize.
Да, аплодисменты, получается
So your applause.
подарок, приз, книга от издателя.
So a book from the Peter Publishing House goes to the winner. So applause to Victor. Great job, Victor.